Chapter 1. The Cry from the Island. Years later, Odysseus would still remember that island. He would remember the sea that night. He would remember the crying that came from the cliffs. And he would remember this most of all. He took 12 men ashore. Only a few came back. On the 10th night, the ship lay still on a black sea. There was no wind, no wave. The sail hung like a dead sheet above them. The water jars were nearly empty. The last bread had gone hard in the dark. When the men spoke, thirst had already changed their voices. Then the island began to cry. The sound came from far beyond the rocks. First, it was a woman pleading. Then it became a man calling for help, broken and thin, as if his mouth were full of blood. Young Iason rose from the stern, pale in the starlight. "There is someone on the island." No one answered. They had all heard it. Eurylochus came to Odysseus and lowered his voice. "We should not go ashore." Odysseus looked toward the dark shape of the island. By daylight, they had seen grass there, sheep, a stream running down from the hill. To men dying of thirst at sea, the island had looked like a gift from the gods. But now, that gift was crying in the dark. "We have water for 2 days," Odysseus said. "Then we last 2 days," Eurylochus said. "Some cries are not pleas. Some cries are bait." Odysseus said nothing for a moment. He knew the warning was wise. He also knew what would happen if they stayed at sea. First, the men would argue over water. Then they would steal it. Then knives would come out for a mouthful of bread. Death at sea does not always arrive with a storm. Sometimes it comes with hunger. At dawn, Odysseus took 12 men ashore. They hid the ship behind a line of rocks and carried water skins, short blades, and rope. The island was too quiet. The grass was thick. Sheep grazed with their heads down, but no shepherd called to them. The air smelled of milk, smoke, and wet stone. They found the first footprint in the mud. It was larger than a shield. The toes had crushed shells into the earth. Around the edge of the print, the mud was dark red. A little farther on, they found half a mast. The rope tied around it was foreign. Another ship had come here before them. Iason walked 2 steps ahead, then stopped. There were bones in the grass. Human bones. Some had been whitened by the sun. Others were fresh, split open as if bitten by teeth too large to belong to any man. Iason stepped back and broke a rib under his heel. The sound was small, but every man froze. "Back to the ship," Eurylochus said. Odysseus did not answer at once, because from beyond the slope came the warm smell of cheese. It was too real, too near, like food set out on purpose for starving men. Behind the hill stood a cave. Its mouth was as tall as a gate. Inside were hides, wooden pails, and rows of round white cheeses. Sheep grazed outside, calm as if they were cared for every morning. The men saw food, and their fear weakened. "Water and cheese," Eurylochus said. "Then we leave." Odysseus looked into the dark of the cave. There were ashes inside, and blood, not old blood. Then, from the deepest part of the cave, a soft cry came again. The same cry they had heard in the night. Chapter 2. The Stone at the Door. They went in anyway. Hungry men are good at mistaking traps for gifts. They filled the water skins. They stuffed cheese into cloth bags. One man whispered that perhaps the owner of the cave was already dead. Odysseus said nothing. He saw a rough stone bed in the shadows. Beside it lay a pile of bones. Most were sheep bones, but not all. There were human hand bones among them. They had been picked clean. "Move," Odysseus said. They turned toward the mouth of the cave. Outside, the sheep began to stir. First came the bells, then the footsteps. One step, then another. The cave trembled around them. The men went still. Eurylochus grabbed Iason and pulled him behind a stone pillar. The daylight at the cave mouth vanished under a giant shadow. The Cyclops had returned. He was taller than they had imagined. His shoulders were like a ridge of rock. His arms hung almost to his knees. In the center of his forehead was one pale grey eye, turning slowly, like the moon before a storm. He did not rage. He drove the sheep inside. He set down his pails. Then he pressed one hand against the cave wall, lowered his head, and breathed in. "Men." The word rolled through the cave like falling stone. No one moved. The Cyclops turned his head toward the place where they were hiding. He had not just found them. He was waiting for them to reveal themselves. Odysseus stepped out. His sword stayed at his side. "We are travelers from the sea," he said. "The wind brought us here. By the laws of the gods, a host should welcome strangers." The Cyclops looked down at him. There was no anger in that eye, only calculation. He was looking for the leader, the frightened ones, the ones who might betray the rest. "You brought them here?" the Cyclops asked. Odysseus did not answer. The Cyclops let his eye move to the men behind him. Then Odysseus understood. The creature had already guessed. "I led them," Odysseus said. "Good." The Cyclops bent and lifted the great stone beside the entrance. It was large enough to seal a city gate. 12 strong sailors could not have moved it. In his hands, it looked like an empty jar. With one crash, he sealed the cave. The light disappeared. Only the fire remained, red against the white faces of the men. The Cyclops sat down and reached out. There was no room to run. There was no battle to fight. He took 2 men. The first did not even shout his name before he was smashed against the wall. The second screamed in the giant's hand, a high sound, almost no longer human. Then came the crack of bone. Iason covered his mouth with both hands. Tears ran between his fingers. The Cyclops ate slowly, as if he wanted every man to hear. Firelight moved across his teeth. Blood fell onto the stone floor. One drop, then another. When he was done, he wiped his hands on a sheepskin and looked at Odysseus again. "Tomorrow," he said, "I eat the one who speaks best." Chapter 3. The Monster's Game. No one slept that night. The Cyclops slept beside the sealed entrance like a fallen hill. Each breath made the fire bend and brighten. The men huddled at the far wall, afraid even to weep too loudly. At dawn, the Cyclops woke. He was not in a hurry to eat. He moved the stone aside just enough to let the sheep pass. A blade of sunlight entered the cave. Several men rushed toward it by instinct. Without turning his head, the Cyclops put one hand down. One sailor was crushed under his palm, his chest folded inward. The others stopped. The Cyclops let the sheep out, then sealed the cave again. Before he left, he threw a stone knife onto the floor, then a few bones. He looked down at Odysseus. "When men are hungry, do they eat sheep first, or each other?" Then he set the stone back and went away. Silence filled the cave. It was quiet enough to hear every man swallow. After a long time, someone whispered, "He does not want us to kill sheep." Another man said, "He wants us to kill each other." Fear works faster in the dark than rot. A sailor named Alces stood suddenly and pointed at Odysseus. "You brought us here. Maybe if we give you to him, the rest of us live." The cave seemed to freeze. Several men looked at Odysseus. Even Iason looked at him. Odysseus did not draw his sword. He knew that if he did, they were finished. The knife on the floor was not a weapon. It was a question. The Cyclops wanted to know whether fear would cut them open before he returned. Odysseus walked to the fire and lifted a heavy wooden stake. It was the giant's cheese-stirring pole, thicker than a man's thigh. "He will spare no one," Odysseus said. "Last night he ate the strongest. This morning he killed the first man who tried to run. He kept me alive because he wants to watch me struggle." He pushed one end of the stake into the fire. "Then let him watch." No one spoke after that. The fire slowly ate into the wood. The stake began to crack, as if something inside it were waking. At dusk, the Cyclops returned. He moved the stone. The sheep came in one by one. He did not seal the entrance at once. First, he looked at the stone knife. There was no blood on it. The men were still alive. The corner of his mouth moved. It might have been a smile. Odysseus came forward with a wineskin. "This is the best wine from my ship," he said. "A gift for the master of the cave." The Cyclops took it, but did not drink. He smelled it. Then he looked at Odysseus. "Is it poisoned?" "If it were," Odysseus said, "I would have drunk it myself." The Cyclops watched him for a long moment. Then he handed the wineskin to one of the sailors. "You drink." The man drank, shaking, and did not die. Only then did the Cyclops laugh. He drank once, then again. The smell of wine soon covered the smell of blood. "Your name," the Cyclops said. Odysseus bowed his head. "My name is Nobody." "Nobody?" "Yes." The giant narrowed his eye. He did not believe it, but the wine was already in his blood. His breathing grew heavy, his fingers slowed. "Good," he said. "Nobody, I will eat you last." Then he reached for the nearest sailor. The man screamed. Odysseus took one step forward and stopped. The Cyclops was drunk, but his eye was still on him. It was another test. If Odysseus rushed forward, the plan would die. So he stood still and watched the man dragged into the dark. That night, bone broke in the cave again. Chapter 4. Nobody blinded him. The giant finally fell when the fire was almost out.
He slept against the wall, his mouth wet with wine and blood. His one eye stayed half open, still and pale in the firelight. Odysseus raised his hand. The men stood. They dragged the burning stake from the coals. One end glowed black-red. Heat rolled over their faces and made their eyes water. No one spoke. Some things cannot be spoken before they are done. If you name them, fear hears you. They lifted the stake and walked toward the giant. Odysseus was at the front. He saw the Cyclops' eyelid move. For one heartbeat, he thought the creature had woken. But the giant only turned inside a heavy dream. "Now," Odysseus whispered. The stake went in. First came the hiss of burning flesh, then the roar. The sound struck the cave walls like thunder trapped in stone. Men fell to their knees. Iason clutched his ears, blood running down his neck. The Cyclops clawed at the air, but he did not crash blindly through the cave. He reached for the entrance. He guarded the door. Odysseus felt his heart drop. Even blinded, the monster could think. He understood that without an eye, the door had become his eye. Other giants called from outside, "Who hurt you?" The Cyclops held his ruined eye. Blood ran through his fingers. "Nobody," he roared. "Nobody hurt me." For a moment, the valley was silent. Then a voice answered. "If nobody hurt you, then it is a sickness from the gods. Endure it." The footsteps moved away. The sailors almost laughed. Odysseus did not. The Cyclops had not broken. He sat at the entrance with one hand over his bleeding eye and the other stretched across the gap beside the stone. "You think I am stupid," he said. His voice was lower now and worse. "Sheep must leave. Men always try to leave with them." Near dawn, the flock began to stir. The Cyclops moved the stone, but he did not step aside. He sat by the entrance and let the sheep pass under his hand one by one. He touched each back. The first, the second, the third. His palm moved slowly. Anyone hidden on a sheep's back would be found. Iason looked at Odysseus as if asking whether they were already dead. Odysseus looked at the bellies of the sheep. The giant was touching backs, so they would hide beneath. There was little time. They tied themselves under the sheep with rope, 3 animals to a man. The wool was filthy and warm against their faces. It was hard to breathe. The first group passed, then the second. With the third, one sheep panicked and bleated. The Cyclops stopped. Every heart in the cave seemed to stop with him. He touched the sheep's back, then its horns. Then he let it go. Odysseus was last. He was tied beneath the largest ram. The animal walked slowly, as if it knew it carried a life under its ribs.
At the entrance, the Cyclops laid his hand on the ram's back. He held it there for a long time, long enough for Odysseus to hear his own heart striking inside his chest. "Old friend," the Cyclops murmured, "why are you so slow today?" The ram did not answer. It breathed and took one more step. The giant's fingers slid down through the wool. They came close enough to brush Odysseus's hair. Chapter 5. The True Name. The ram finally stepped into the sun. Light cut into Odysseus's eyes. For a moment, he forgot how to breathe. He did not untie himself at once. Only when they were far enough from the cave did he roll out from under the ram and cut the others free. One by one, the surviving men stood. No one cheered. They were alive, but too few of them were alive. They ran for the shore. Behind them, the Cyclops heard movement. He burst from the cave, his face covered in blood, the hollow of his eye turned toward the sky. He could not see them, but he could hear their feet. He could smell sweat. He could hear the ship ropes being loosed by the water. "Nobody!" he roared. Odysseus did not look back. They reached the ship and threw themselves aboard. The first boulder hit the sea and lifted a wave that nearly rolled them over. The second came closer. Stone tore past the stern. Splinters flew. One oar snapped. Iason fell hard against the deck, blood running into his eye. The third boulder struck so near that seawater poured into the hull. The ship swung back toward the island as if an invisible hand had seized it and was dragging it home. "Row!" Eurylochus shouted. "Do not stop!" Every man bent over an oar. The wood groaned in their hands. At last, the ship broke free of the turning water. On the cliff, the Cyclops stood like a mountain that had lost its eye. The men thought it was over. They were wrong. Odysseus stood at the stern and looked back at the island. His hands were still shaking, not from fear, from rage, from the weight of the men he had not brought back. He could still hear them in the cave, still hear the night when bones broke in the dark. Eurylochus grabbed his arm. "Do not speak. Do not give him your name." Odysseus pulled free. He shouted toward the shore. "Listen, giant. It was not nobody who blinded you. It was Odysseus, king of Ithaca, son of Laertes." The sea wind carried his name back to the island and into the ear of the Cyclops. The giant became still. That stillness was worse than his rage. After a while, he knelt by the sea and turned his bleeding face toward the water. "Father." At that moment, the sea changed. The wind did not rise. The waves did not break, but every man aboard felt something ancient wake beneath the hull. The Cyclops spoke softly. "Poseidon, hear this name. Odysseus, king of Ithaca. He has blinded your son. Let him never reach home. Or, if he must reach it, let him arrive late. Let his ship break. Let his men die. Let him come home as someone other than the man who left." There was no thunder. No god appeared. Only the sea tapping against the ship. Once. Then again, like fingers knocking from below. Odysseus stood at the stern, and slowly the color left his face. At last he understood. The Cyclops had not asked for his name only to remember an enemy. A name could be cursed. A name could be given to a god. The ship sailed on. Behind them, the island grew small. The cave vanished into the shadow of the cliffs. The men who survived bent over their oars, and no one spoke of victory. They had escaped the cave of the man-eater. But from that day on, Odysseus's voyage home truly began to darken.